All right, hello class. One of the topics that we'll be looking at this week is the idea of the Middle Passage. Now, the Middle Passage, you may wonder why it's called the Middle Passage. Well, middle, as an adjective, has various meanings. For the captains and the crews of slave ships, the Middle Passage was one of many legs in the maritime trade of sugar, and other semi-finished American goods, manufactured European commodities, and African slaves. For the enslaved Africans, the Middle Passage was the middle leg of three very specific journeys that these slaves took from Africa to the Americas. The first journey was the overland journey in Africa, as Africans were captured by Europeans or sold into slavery by other African tribes. These slaves would then be carried overland across Africa to the slave trading factories. Often this distance were in excess of hundreds of miles. Second, the Middle Passage was the oceanic trip, which lasted anywhere from 1 to 6 months. The third part of this journey was known as acculturation, or sometimes referred to as seasoning. And this is the transportation of the slaves to the American mine, to the plantations, or to the other locations where the slaves would be forced to labor. So the Middle Passage is referred to as the Middle Passage for a couple of reasons, but primarily because it was the middle journey of the three that these slaves would take. Now, estimates vary. Different researchers will estimate that the total number of Africans forced across the Atlantic between the 16th and the 19th centuries were somewhere between 11 and 12 million people. But it fails to take into consideration the number of people who died in this journey. It's estimated that at least 2 million slaves would die at sea. Several million more would die in the overland African leg or during the seasoning. And so this is clearly a terrible period of American and global world history. The conditions in all three legs were terrible. But how do we know this? I know we can imagine that the conditions might be terrible. In fact, I know the textbook has an image that shows how these slaves were laid head to foot, shoulder to shoulder across the base of this ship. Steven Spielberg's movie Amistad does a great job. There's a 10-minute segment in which it tries to recreate the conditions. It shows women giving birth to babies, people chained together, throwing up during the middle of storms, being able to clean themselves properly, laying in muck and filth and being fed a spoonful of rotting food every day. One of the best ways that we've been able to piece together what conditions look like is from this account provided by Olaudah Equiano, who wrote at the end of the 18th century. In this account, Equiano will recount the fearsomeness of the crew, the filth and the gloom of the hold, the inadequate provisions allotted to the captives, and the desperation that drove some of the slaves to suicide. Now, Equiano claims to have been born in Igboland, which today is Nigeria, but there has been some doubt. Some historians argue that he was in fact born in colonial South Carolina, where he collected the memories of the Middle Passage from the African-born slaves that he worked with, and was able then, at the latter half of his life, as he became free and worked as an abolitionist, where he pieced together these memories into a narrative which was clearly very effective. Regardless, this is one of the most vivid accounts that we have of what conditions were like in the Middle Passage. I hope you maybe enjoy it isn't the right word, but I hope you can appreciate the conditions as you try to consider what life was like. What would it be like to lay shoulder to shoulder with another person for 6 months in your own filth?